Okay, so let's put a lot of this together, because what you want, of course, in working with shelters is to be able to convey a lot of this stuff to the adoptive parents of the animals that you've helped rescue. This is just a reiteration of the most helpful, least helpful, and setback type of things. And what do I do? But in this case, what do I tell adopters to do? And there's the chart, and I only put it up because we're going to come back to it later in a form of more specific recommendations. So, expectations and prognosis for improvement. Why is accuracy so important? And this is what these studies are allowing us to answer a lot more precisely now. Well, there's a couple reasons. Here's one comment from one of the participants in our study. She wasn't a normal dog when we got her, and it was very weird to have a dog that didn't act like a dog. This is the kind of comment that, although there's nothing wrong per se with the comment, it's nothing that should be surprising. With the information we now know, especially in the puppy mill dogs, nobody should be shocked or be making these comments because it risks the adoption success going bad if people are getting these kinds of dramatic revelations. So we want to be able to prepare them well ahead of time. So that's why it's important that we have this information to convey. But this is even more important, more specific. I feel like I'm failing her somewhat since I can't get her to trust me even after 4 years. That owner, given enough of the information that we now have, wouldn't have to say that because she would know she's not failing the dog. And these are very valuable things to help the dog succeed in the adoptive household. So, prognosis for improvement and recovery. Let's look at the improvement in specific problems for rescued puppy mill dogs. This is just some screen captures off SurveyMonkey of things you've already seen. What did I do with my pointer? This is the question about people, the sociability of the dog, and the fact that the most common is the fact that they're very selective in their sociability to people, but very friendly towards dogs. And what I did with the follow-up on these questions is I asked them this question, and that is, does your dog's sociability differ now from how you answered in the previous question? And that, of course, is going to tell us what changes, if any, have occurred since they adopted the animal. And what we found, or I should point out, even though I left that neutral and didn't want to lead them with, has he gotten better or worse, when I went through all the comments, it's virtually 100% that all the yeses on all these questions are for the positive. So 610 people that answered this question, pretty much all but maybe 608 of them, found that there was a dramatic improvement, or some improvement, I should say, in the dog's sociability since they adopted the dog. So there's improvement to be noted there. Likewise, and even more so, trust in humans. We saw that they were very selective and generally non-trustful to the broad array of people in their lives. But this is what happens after they're adopted. The improvement is in 85% of them, they grow to become more trusting with people. So that's another thing, that when we're adopting these animals out, we can give them that kind of information among all these other things that I'm going to give you too. Now, it gets a little bit less positive here. Altered mental functioning. This was the question, if you remember, that asked about things like memory loss, irritability, blank stare, gets lost, that kind of a thing. But look at this. This is the question here of, did this change since you adopted the dog? And in this case, the no was a little bit more than the yes. So in this case, there would, if an owner adopted a dog and called you in a few months describing that, and then said, what are the odds that he'll get better? Right now, your answer would have to be about 50-50 on any of those types of things. And similarly, this question that I asked about human psychiatric conditions, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, and that kind of a thing, this is even more negative, meaning that we can't give people, if they call us and say, my dog is showing signs of autism, what's the likelihood that we'll see that improve? Unfortunately, the likelihood is only 20% on that. So the good news is that those are all fairly uncommon in the dogs. But the bad news is that if they have them, that recovery is not as hopeful as all the other ones. House training. This is something that I already presented to you, but let me just show you here that when I asked them about improvement, there was a 71% of the dogs that did show improvement. However, this question is worded specifically of what your dog is now showing, meaning that this is the end result. This is not before that change occurs. So when I gave you that pie chart earlier that said 2/3 of them will continue to have accidents after roughly 2 years in the household, that's that chart made into a pie. So even though they do improve, so if they took them home right away, you could tell people that 71% of them improve. But also, they unfortunately do very often hold on to that not full control. Now, eye contact, I told you that was more important than you might think. It also is something that improves quite a bit in at least 71% of the dogs. The poor eye contact or non-eye contact does improve after they've adopted the dog. So this is just a layout of all those things I just ran through in terms of improvement since adoption. The least is the one where they have the human psychiatric type signs. Altered mental functioning also lower, but all the other ones showing significant improvement. Now, I also wanted to know about delayed improvement because a lot of people get worried when one of two things happens. Either they have the dog and nothing's happened since they adopted the dog, or the dog has achieved some level but then plateaued off. So I asked them in this question, has anything made a dramatic improvement after being somewhat stable and non-improving for at least 6 months? And this is where we got quite a few yeses. Here are some examples. It was almost a full year when I noticed a change in her, and it happened almost overnight. That's when she became happy to see me and gave me kisses. After 4 full years of being with me, last spring, Mickey walked down the ramp, off the deck, and into the yard. He walked the fence line, sniffing the air, letting his feet touch the grass. It was a day I will never, ever forget. I stood inside and watched him and was indescribably moved. What huge progress. I would say the day she finally gave us true eye contact was a big deal. It took about 2 years. Being outgoing and greeting people on walks, change occurred after about 2 years. She was so afraid of my husband for 3.5 years, it seemed to happen overnight. One day she wouldn't go near him. The next day she was on his lap giving him kisses. She was fearful of being touched at all. It was probably at least a year before she would let me pick her up without cornering her. It took 4 years before she was willing to let my husband touch her. It was 5 to 6 years before she would be willing to sit next to me on the couch without me being there, without being held there. We have had her here for 8 years now, and just within the last 6 months, she has actually half crawled in my lap. So the really neat thing about these pieces of information is that we can now tell people who have adopted these dogs and they call us concerned that nothing's happened, that things haven't changed. We now know that a lot of these dogs can take this long to improve. So there's almost always hope, even if they call you 5 years later and say he won't accept my husband. There's still actually hope that he will at some point. So this has really been exciting for us to learn so that we can convey this to people after they've adopted them. Now here I asked them, what still needed improvement do you feel is most important for your dog's well-being? And these are some of the things you might actually be able to predict yourself. I wish she would stop being terrified of other dogs when we walk, and that she would stop shaking with fear at other times, become more trusting of people. She needs to feel more comfortable being touched by humans. I would like for her to play with toys and have fun. The house training, which, by the way, was the number one answer. A little less Velcroed to me. As damaged as she is emotionally, I love her just as she is. I wish she could trust me completely, and I wish there was some way to instill peace in her mind so she would know that she is home forever. Okay, so A lot of that is good news, but mostly informative type of news that we can pass along to pet owners, and I'll summarize that in specific recommendations later. But I want to shift to some really cool and good news that we learned. This is where I asked them, I set up this question by saying, many but not all puppy mill dogs are considered to be different than typical, average, well-adjusted, emotionally healthy, normal dogs. Would you, this is question 27, would you consider your dog to have been a normal, well-adjusted dog when he or she arrived in your household after a few weeks of adjustment? And the next question was, would you consider your dog to be normal, well-adjusted, to be a normal, well-adjusted dog now? So on arrival in the home, 7% of people scored their dog as what they would consider normal dog. But in the now, which, as we talked about, is an average of 2 years later, looking at the whole pool, it was 35% of people said that their dogs were now normal dogs. And that's a 5-time increase, which is great, but it also leaves a huge chunk, 65% to be exact, of dogs that obviously aren't what you'd consider normal. Okay, now here's a different question that I asked them, and that is this. I pointed out that some of these, a lot of these issues in dogs, in puppy mill dogs that make them different resolve in time, and that you may see partial resolution, you may see full resolution. So I asked them this: if you believe that your dog was not a typical normal dog when he or she arrived in the house, what degree of overall improvement have you noted in becoming a normal dog? As an example, if your dog has made very little improvement, you might say he or she is 10% improved, whereas if she's made dramatic improvement and is now very close to what you would call a normal dog, you might say he's 90% improved. And if you notice no change, of course, you'd score it as 0 improvement. And, of course, at 100%, that's where you have now a normal dog. And so, obviously, what we want to see here is all the dogs bunched down here where they've improved, 70, 80, 90, 100%. And that's what we got. The large bulk of the dogs made dramatic improvements towards being a normal dog, no matter where their deficit started. And I actually grouped this together so you can appreciate it a little bit easier, and that is that 70% or greater improvement was made by that group of dogs, 40 to 60, 10 to 30, and then 0 to 10 was very minimal. So this is hugely beneficial to be able to convey to the adopters in terms of the prognosis for overall improvement. Now, to delve even deeper into this, I asked this: quality of life, happiness, emotional well-being, everyone has their own ideas of what each of these terms mean. Most people find overlap between these concepts. Some people even regard 2 or more to be the same thing. There's no right or wrong on this issue. Please rate the following factors on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being lowest possible, 10 being highest possible you could imagine a dog having. Rate each for when the dog first arrived in the household, after a brief adjustment period, and now. So here's what the layout of the graph would look like. Along here, quality of life then, that means when adopted, now. Happiness then, now. Emotional well-being then, now. Enjoyment of life then, now. These are the low numbers towards the front of the scale, 0, 1, 2, 3, lowest possible. And towards the back of the scale are the high numbers, 8, 9, 10, highest possible. So this is what the overall picture of the group of dogs looked like when they arrived in their home. And that is that there was all the weight of all of these scores was down in the 0, 1, 2, 3 category, where you can see right there. But this is the coolest slide I've got, and the one that I love so much. And that is, after they've been in the household, everything along these lines of happiness type things have made a dramatic shift to the 8, 9, 10, so that these dogs as a group are just overwhelmingly improved and just show a remarkable adaptation to life. So here's the picture version of the last slide. This is little Shiraz. Shiraz, this is the day she was adopted, and she's on the husband's lap here, and the the lady adopter told me that Shiraz here was absolutely terrified, trembling, and had that absolute vacant, blank look in her eyes on the day she arrived. And this was her a year and a half later, which really gives you kind of a neat emotional view of dogs. But she really just came along so nicely. Again, just like the last slide suggested, the large number of these dogs do. So I also asked them here, what has been your most rewarding? What's been most rewarding about your experiences with this dog? And I collected a whole bunch because they're really cool to read. She brings us happiness every day. Her personality is so unique that if she's not around, we miss her if we're on vacation. Our family would not be the same without our adorable Cookie. We love her so very much. I wasn't looking for an abused or problem animal to adopt and was very concerned at the beginning about how she would settle down, but it's been an amazing transformation and very rewarding experience. If I had known before bringing her home how emotionally damaged she was, I may not have adopted her. I was looking for a cuddle partner. She's been a labor of love and has added so much to my life. I can't imagine a time when she'll not be here. My heart breaks just thinking about it. Watching his progress has been awe-inspiring. When I think of the condition he was in when he came to me physically and emotionally, I cannot believe his resilience, his willingness to trust and love. He looks at me like I'm the most incredible creature in the world, but he is. He's such a sweet little guy, and despite the $3,200 for surgery, I wouldn't trade him for the world. Seeing the love in her eyes, how she walks with her head up and her tail up. When we first got her, her tail was scraggly in between her legs. Now when she walks on her leash, she walks like a show dog in the ring. Seeing the shivering, peeing, frightened, scruffy little creature come to life and beauty, I tear up every time I think about it. He's impacted my special needs daughter. They bonded instantly. He seemed to understand her issues and disabilities. He's now her psychiatric service dog. The most rewarding experience was seeing Charlie start to trust me. The first day he actually came to me for attention, I cried. He was so frightened of me at first. I had never seen a dog be so scared of people before. I really feel like I've made a big difference in his life, and that's the best feeling in the world. Seeing her transformation from a frightened, cowering animal to a smiling little friend that she's become today, experiencing the transformative power of love and observing the almost magical ability of these formerly abused animals to somehow find the forgiveness to give another human being a chance to be trusted and loved. Truthfully, in the first 6 to 8 months, there were times I was disappointed in the adoption of Dolly, mainly because I was afraid that she would always be dependent only on me, and that was not what I wanted. It seemed overwhelming to be her, the one. But she's been such a rewarding being to have in our home. She has taught us patience and strength. I can't imagine my life without her, and I'm 100% thrilled we had decided to adopt her. Watching him grow and become a dog has been one of the best parts of my life. I truly admire what he's become. Don't tell my other dogs, but he's my favorite. Now, what has been the least rewarding experience with this dog? This is the most common answer I got. Absolutely nothing. It's all been good, that we couldn't do more, knowing how much damage the mill did to him mentally that can never be fixed, only that we cannot rescue 100 more. So it's that particular question drew out a lot of additional positive answers. However, in full disclosure of the fact that not everything's great, these are some of the answers we got on the other side. What's been the least rewarding about your experiences with this dog? Nothing really has helped her. She's just too damaged. She refused to respond to anything I tried. Not much of anything was rewarding. She was one of the toughest nuts to crack as far as helping her be somewhat normal and enjoy life. Unsuccessful in my book, so not rewarding at all. I don't feel Sheba will ever adjust to humans, me included. She will always be afraid. I've done everything I can think of, but she still cowers when approached. I just try to make her life a little easier and happier. They're not all success stories, that's for sure. Okay, more good news. What's your level of satisfaction for having adopted this dog? I gave them 4 choices. Extremely satisfied, moderately satisfied, slightly satisfied, not satisfied, and this is audience participation. So, for the not satisfied, what % of people said that? Guesses? 5, 10? Any others? None? Close. 1%. How about slightly? How about moderately? Everybody says everybody says 1. No, it's not 1. All right, so mathematically, 91% extremely satisfied. This is so phenomenal. This is so cool. In fact, I knew this would come back high because of all the people I dealt with before we actually did the formal study, but I didn't know it would come back this high. And when we got these numbers back, I actually got a little worried because I was afraid that if I showed this to an audience of people who weren't all that well-versed in dogs, they'd go, wow, I got to get me one of those dogs, because this is better odds than just a shelter dog, I think. But realize that these are very special people. These are not Joe Schmoes walking down the street. These are people with the hearts to take in dogs that need extra attention, and this is their satisfaction level. So for the people that have the heart and the willingness to take these dogs, you can actually tell them now that their likelihood of being satisfied is sky high. Now, I broke this down into 2 groups. The one group, the green, are the dogs that are still alive. The brown are the dogs that have passed away. There were only 27 of those, I guess, thankfully. But look what we found in that. Of the dogs that passed away, 100% scored it extremely satisfied, 0, for the other 3 choices. So obviously that's a little bit tainted because when you lose your pet, you tend to think of all the best things. But still, come on, that's just fantastic. Okay, so here's another question similar. Assuming your circumstances would accommodate it, would you adopt another puppy mill dog? And this is a simple yes or no. And you have to realize, of course, on all these questions, they're dealing with all those problems we just spent the last 2.5 hours going through. So, what's your guess here on no? %. 95% of people would take another dog. And in fact, since part 2 of the questionnaire followed the part 1 by about 6 months, a lot of people, when they answered this question, said, we already have, or 2 or 3 or whatever. So these people that have taken in these dogs do find them, for the vast majority, so incredibly rewarding that they want more. All right, so here's another question. Would you recommend to another person to adopt a puppy mill dog? Yes, maybe, and no. I won't hold you in suspense on this one. The number of people that said no was 1 out of every 200 people, 0.5%. And the rest of them were split pretty much down the middle of yes and maybe, which was the whole reason I put maybe, is that it's kind of hard to say blanketly yes. And I followed that up with the obvious question, if your answer to the previous question was yes or maybe, would the person to whom you would potentially recommend adopting a puppy mill dog need to have any special qualities, skills, or qualifications? And this is no surprise, 95% yes. In fact, the only surprise is that it's not 100%. I have to assume that the people the 5% that said nobody needs any special qualities had the super easy dogs, and didn't see any problem with them. Okay, what would those special qualities or skills be? And this is where they just filled in by written answer. 626 people answered. Patience, 520. Understanding, 161. And love, 107. So a lot of people were on the same wavelength with those responses. Prognosis for hoarded animals with impaired psychological health, as just for the other things, we just don't have as much data. After experiencing survival-focused existence with little to no human socialization, hoarded animals may show extreme shyness or aggression, have trouble bonding with humans. For the more severely affected, socialization rehabilitation efforts may take lots of time and patience and aren't always successful. Outcomes range from the immediate euthanasia for extreme psychological and behavioral disorders to long-term rehab with partial recovery to complete recovery of psychological health and ability to enjoy life. Here's a few cats from the hoarding study. These are not the cats from the Pahrump Desert. These are from a general hoarding study that we're starting. Felix took a very long time to adjust in our home and be social with family members. He spent a lot of time hiding in the first few months and is still timid and fearful. He's come a long way, but I believe will always be affected by his rough beginnings. He's still hesitant when you touch him and pick him up, but he's begun to spend time relaxing with us in the evening and laying with us and the other cats. Hector is very affectionate with family and seems pretty well adjusted. He's very mischievous and always in something he shouldn't be, can be destructive. He seems to have developed a no-fear attitude from the experience of living with 40 cats. Rocky was wild for the first 6 months that he came to live here. He would run up and down the stairs for hours yelling. He bonded with me right away, but it took him 1 year for him to warm up to my husband. Rocky's now calm and sits on my lap every night. When he sees me, he rolls and shows me his belly. He loves belly rubs. And here are some from the Pahrump, Nevada Desert Rescue. This is not the same cat I brought home in October 2007. She hid under my bed for 2 months. Now she acts like a different cat and wants affection constantly. Mickey was so terrified and withdrawn when we first brought him home. He's made incredible progress. He's the most affectionate, loving cat I've ever had. He loves to cuddle. We have no concerns with Theta. She is well adjusted and has taken over the house. Her behavior has changed a lot since we first got her. She was very defensive and non-tolerant. She's become a wonderful cat. This is Amy, part of our hoarding study, a Whippet Shepherd born into the hoarding situation of over 200 dogs. She was rescued at an estimated 2 years of age. This is the email that I received from Amy's owner in January of this year. Terrified of everything, extremely frightened of everything and everyone, frightened to eat, even by herself, feral by all accounts. Amy is mainly scared of everything. Gradually over the past year, we see glimpses of a normal dog beginning to emerge. And 7 months later, which was only a few days ago, I got this email. Amy's made great strides. She loves car rides. She goes for walks daily with her human and other 2 dogs. She eats her food eagerly now. She climbs onto the bed and or couch in the evenings to join her humans for an hour or so. She's also spending more and more time outside with us at lunchtime. She seems to like her yard more and more, and in the mornings before breakfast, she greets me with a tail up and likes to play chase me before she gets breakfast. We often joke that we almost have a normal dog now. So, advice for adopters. Adopting a rescued puppy mill dog, what to expect. This is key because you want people to not have surprises, not be disappointed, and to know exactly what they're facing. And these are just summary comments. Obviously, if you're going to make this into a handout, you want a little bit of explanation with each of these. Slow, often very slow improvement. You already saw that in a lot of comments. Some of these are years of improvement. Backsliding during improvement is common. Limits to improvement, so we all know that they're going to progress to a point and in some cases not progress beyond that. Fear, we showed that is or can be quite significant, both specific to specific things or generalized of everything. House training limitations, we obviously want to point that out to people well ahead of time. Bonding to one person is very common, so don't be disappointed or surprised if that's what your dog does, and we're seeing that also in the early results of the hoarded dogs too. Touch sensitivity, touching, holding, hugging, and picking up, all of those things that you're wanting to do as a loving human being may or may not be well received by your dog, and although it will likely improve with time, you have to understand that that's not the way they're wired right now. And eye contact avoidance, do not interpret that as being rejected. That is the way that they are often wired in their upbringing, whether it's because they're attacked by cage mates and have to use submissive signs of looking away. We don't know, but the point is that it's very common, so don't interpret that as a failed adoption. This is the big chart I've already showed you in green and yellow, just put into sort of a handout form. Again, in summary form, each of these you'd want to add a little paragraph description to. But these are the things in green that people should all try and expect either good results or neutral results. The yellow are the things that they can try, but be aware that they can backfire and work the opposite for some dogs so that they want to bail out on those if it looks like they're causing any problems at all. And then they've got basically the guidelines here to get their dog best healed from what we know. And then I made this up, 10 cardinal rules for adopting a puppy mill survivor. This is just, in general, it reiterates some of the things we already talked about. Number 1, have no expectations or timetables for changes, because if you do, you'll probably be disappointed. So don't even make any to start with. Patience, 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 and more patience, and then be really, really patient. That's the bottom line of how to care for these dogs. Puppy mill survivors have an absolute requirement for unconditional acceptance. If you're not prepared or able to provide this, do not adopt one of these special dogs. Being with, being comforted by, and learning from other dogs is the single best way to emotionally heal for all but a few puppy mill survivors. Tiny improvements are monumental improvements. Never punish, scold, discipline, or raise your voice with your puppy mill survivor. 2 cliches do not apply to puppy mill survivors. Time heals all wounds and love conquers all. However, time and love remain vital parts of the healing process. Emotional healing is an up and down journey. On the way up, 2 steps forward and 1 step back is a normal part of emotional recovery. You'll likely see the 1 step back many times and even occasionally 2 or even 3 steps back. This is all normal. Never forget that no matter what your puppy mill survivor does, she still needs you to keep trying to help her heal. You are doing something that only a few special people are capable of and can be entrusted with, and no matter what happens, it's all but assured that you will gain a sense of satisfaction and reward you've never before known. So, I'm pretty sure I'm on time here. Actually 20 minutes ahead. Anyway, again, just not to batter you with this, but if you've got any dogs you can refer to our study, please do, because I just want to get a big number.